All right, let's talk about the MAGA movement. From the outside, it often looks like this massive, unified political force, right? But what if there's something totally different going on under the surface? Today, we're going to unpack an analysis that peels back the layers on this thing, and it suggests the movement might not be what we think it is at all.
So let's just get right to it. Here's the big question we're tackling today. Is the MAGA movement actually breaking apart? It's a huge question, and the source material we're digging into has a pretty compelling and honestly a kind of surprising answer.
Okay, so to even start to answer that, we have to challenge the way we usually see this. You hear it all the time described as this one single thing. But this analysis says, hang on, the reality is way, way more complicated than that.
And this really gets to the heart of it. The common view from the outside? A unified monolith, one giant solid block. But what this source argues is that it's actually something much more delicate, a fragile coalition made up of a bunch of different pieces.
I mean, the source just puts it out there, plain and simple. It was never really one movement. It was always a coalition of different groups. This one idea, that it's a coalition, not a monolith, is the key to understanding everything else we're about to look at.
So if it is a coalition, well, who's in it? Who are these different groups? The analysis actually breaks it down into some really specific factions. And here they are. Now, according to this analysis, these aren't just slightly different shades of the same color. Nope, these are distinct tribes, and they each have their own media universe. You've got the Daily Wire crowd, the people watching Real America's Voice, evangelical Christians tuned into networks like TBN, the classic Fox News audience, and even a group the source calls RFK-style health libertarians. And here is the absolute kicker. The analysis makes a huge point of this. These groups are basically separate. They live in their own little media bubbles, and there's almost no overlap. These aren't just different tastes and commentators. We're talking about totally distinct ideological worlds.
That lack of overlap points to something much, much deeper. The coalition might have come together for a shared goal, like winning an election, but the source argues there was never any real ideological agreement on what the slogan "Make America Great Again" actually means.
Well, that just begs the question, right? If these groups were all so different and didn't even agree on the core mission statement, what in the world was holding it all together? Or maybe, who was the glue?
So what was that common thread? Now, Donald Trump is the obvious answer, of course, but the source points to another figure, someone a little more unexpected, who it says acted as a unique kind of bridge connecting all these separate worlds.
Let's call this person the Keystone figure. Like the keystone in an arch. This is the one individual who could show up on all those different platforms, from an evangelical network one day to Real America's Voice the next, and be accepted as one of them by every single one of those factions.
And the person this source identifies is Charlie Kirk. The argument is that while a lot of other big names were seen as belonging to one specific camp, Kirk was the one person who could just seamlessly move between all of them, becoming this unique, unifying force that tied all the loose ends of the coalition together.
But that unity, as fragile as it was, has been seriously tested. And the source points to one specific issue that started to expose the deep, deep cracks in this coalition, the whole question of foreign wars.
According to this analysis, the whole thing really started to fracture over a potential war with Iran. That conflict dragged a fundamental disagreement right out into the open, one that had been kind of simmering under the surface for a while. And it was all about America's role in the world and its involvement in foreign conflicts.
So you ended up with two opposing camps. On one side, you had a more traditional interventionist view, but on the other, you had this rising tide of isolationism, really pushing a strict America First policy of avoiding foreign fights and not spending money overseas. This became the ideological battlefield, where the coalition is now cracking.
So where does all this go from here? Does the whole thing just shatter into a million pieces, or does it somehow find a new balance? Well, the source lays out two possible paths forward.
Path number one is a continued fracture pushed along by really powerful isolationist voices. But then there's path number two, a recalibration. This is where the coalition manages to stick together, not because they agree on ideology, but because of loyalty to a central figure like Donald Trump. And the source actually points to Steve Bannon's shifting position as a key example of this second path.
And you can see this recalibration perfectly in the way Steve Bannon's stance changed. According to the source, Bannon was initially against intervention. But then he publicly shifted, basically saying, look, once the decision's made, my personal ideology doesn't matter as much as unity and trust in Trump.
So, when you boil it all down, here's the bottom line from this analysis. Despite all the ideological fights and the different factions pulling in different directions, Donald Trump still has this unique political gravity. He might be the one person who can overcome these divisions and stop the whole coalition from flying apart.
And that brings us right back to our big question. Is the future going to be a continued, fragile coalition, held together by personality and a kind of pragmatism? Or are these ideological cracks just too deep, leading to a total collapse? According to this analysis, that is the central drama we should all be watching.